Okay, we'll get this webinar started here today. Just welcome everyone and thank you for joining us here today on this webinar to have a look at some best practices for building some incident request program inside System Center Service Manager. My name is Brett Moffat. I'm a solutions architect for Cireson here in the APAC region, and I'm joined today with our senior consultant here for the APAC region, Jovan Hedrick. Hello, Jovan.
Hello, Brett.
You doing well today?
Yes, I am. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. Jovan's actually based in Japan, so not so warm there at the moment. Not snowing though?
Unfortunately. It is a little bit. It's not sticking, but it's still pretty cold, so
okay,
a little bit
nice. Awesome. Okay, cool. So I'm going to be handing over to Jovan later in this webinar to actually do some demos and hear his experience with building out incident request programs with other customers around the world as well. So I'm going to do a bit of a quick intro as to who we are here at Cireson, what we're doing, and then setting up this webinar, and then also talk about some of the business practices in the background when we're talking about incident management, what we're actually talking about when we talk about incidents. We're using GoToWebinar here, so if you do have any questions, there should be a questions pane that you can type your questions into. Please feel free to do that at any stage, and we'll try to answer them as we go through. If we miss anything or I need to follow something up, I'll email you at the end of it. We're also recording this, so this is going to go up onto our YouTube channel, so you can refer back to this at a later date if you'd like to. So with that said, let's actually get into today's session. The first thing I want to talk about is a little bit about who we are here at Cireson. We were established back in 2012, and our main area of business is around the System Center Service Manager and extending that program to include additional tools, web front end, those sorts of things, and also asset management. And we'll have a bit of a look at what those products are here in a minute. We specifically build up our products on Service Manager, which is one of the most popular ITSM solutions around the world, with thousands of customers worldwide. And it's fully integrated, of course, with the Microsoft System Center suite. So it actually starts to bring together all that System Center pieces. And it's technically brilliant as an engine for IT service management with all the workflows and automation. And of course, all that plumbing into other products in the System Center suite. So what Cireson does is we complement and enhance the overall analyst and end user experience with Service Manager. So if you're an existing System Center Service Manager customer, you'll know the pain points that we're talking about that we address as part of this. If you're a new customer, Service Manager is a very, very powerful engine, and I like to say that it's a lot like a bag of Lego. All the pieces are there to make something absolutely fantastic. You've just got to be able to put those together yourself in the way need to make something that's functional. We come along and extend that and help you put those pieces of Lego together and make that a much faster transition to something useful. Our core focus is around helping customers maximize their investment with both Microsoft and the Cireson technologies. We have over 1,200 customers worldwide across 65 countries. And we actually go the step further than just making the software, and we actually have consulting team here to really help people deliver on that end-to-end project that they're after. So we have over 52,000 consulting hours that we have under our belt with our customers around the world. We also something that we also want you to hear is that we do have very happy and loyal customers. We have over a 95% renewal rate for our customers, which is absolutely fantastic. When you join the Cireson family, basically we go above and beyond to take care of you and to try and help you get the results that you're after. And you don't have to just take my word for it. We have numerous awards, including 2 consecutive years in the Inc. 5000 awards, but you can look at more about that on our website as well. And we're also a Microsoft Gold partner. So when we start talking about our solutions, what we're talking about here is the service management components, which is a web front end to System Center Service Manager. So you don't have to have the console installed on workstations. You can access that from any browser, Chrome or IE or Edge, and really take control of your IT service management from wherever you are. We also introduce asset management into System Center Service Manager, so we can really have a look at the life cycle of both hardware and software assets and their value, and start to maintain what that asset management looks like over the life cycle of either the hardware or the software assets. We also have a control center application, which is a web front end for System Center Configuration Manager. So if you do run a System Center Configuration Manager in your environment, you'll know it's all based on the console that has to be installed on a machine. You then have to lock that down if you want to start to give some of those functions to other people. It's very difficult to lock that down. It's very difficult for people to learn if they haven't learned Configuration Manager in the past and you want them just to do a specific task. So the Cireson Control Center allows you to just give analysts, maybe service desk analysts or desktop analysts or server analysts, just the access they need and just the features that they need, all from a web browser, so they can do just that task and nothing else, and can't accidentally drop something into the wrong collection or create a collection that includes everyone and then deploys the wrong OS to it, or something disastrous that can happen when playing with Configuration Manager. We also have the remote management tools, which sort of sit across both Service Manager and Config Manager as well, to be able to deal with remote management of machines. And that also has to do with user management as well, but we'll have a bit more of a look at that in a couple of slides' time. So about depth of industries that we're in, we're across pretty much every industry that you can think of. A couple of our customers are shown here on this screen. One that I'm particularly proud of is the information technology one there on the right. Is actually Microsoft themselves actually use our products across several different divisions inside Microsoft, including the Xbox division, which is very cool. Dell as well, and lots around Asia Pacific here as well. So the focus of this three-part webinar series that we're getting into is around our new freemium version of Analyst Portal. So historically, we had an end user self-service portal that we gave away for free, and end users could come in and get access to their service catalog. However, earlier this year, we've actually introduced the Analyst Portal for free as well. So this allows analysts to actually update tickets and get access to the queue all from within a browser without having to have the console installed. Now, that's super powerful because it's mobile, it's super customizable, and you can get to it from wherever you need to. So I'm just going to go through some of the features of what the Analyst Portal Community Edition has in it. You can create, view, and edit incidents, so break fix issues that appear there. You can easily manage your active work in a single streamlined view. So instead of having to have the console and have the multiple different types of work items in different views, you can easily see that all in one view. You can see consolidated lists of incidents by the analysts and support groups, of course. You can, of course, list, and filter and search for different incidents that are active in the environment at the moment. You can edit review activities or manual activities or even run book activities related to incidents and incidents only, but you can at least access those as well. You can access basic incident dashboards for key metrics and KPIs. So a really good way of being able to visualize what's happening inside your environment without having to write complicated SSRS reports in the report builder, those sorts of things as well. It is all written in HTML5, so it has no dependencies on plugins, which is great. So you're not having to change anything as far as your browsers are concerned. And it's 100% browser running, so you don't need anything installed on your machine. And of course, it's OS agnostic, so you can run it from a tablet or a phone if you wanted to. So the Analyst Portal, the self-service portal, and also the Analyst Portal Community editions no longer require a key. If you have the free version in the past, you got it free for 30 days, and then you needed to register for a key after that, and it continued to be free ongoing. But now you don't even need that key. The code that is actually the free community edition is the full version of our code. It's not something that has been cut down, or it's a different piece of code. All the bits are exactly the same. The only difference is the key that gets entered unlocks those features. So for example, if you had the free edition and you wanted to trial some of the other paid features, you could just plug in a trial product key, and all of those features then just light up. You don't have to reinstall or reconfigure things. And then if you don't like it after 30 days, that's fine. The key, you just take the key back out again and go back to the free edition for forever, which is fantastic. We also had the remote management, and also the ARO, or advanced request offering pieces, do work with the Analyst Portal Community Edition as well. But of course, those are paid features that you need to be able to purchase to be able to light up. But you can purchase those individually rather than having to purchase the entire suite. Now, we do have fantastic community support for the Analyst Portal Community Edition, so you can connect with other customers and everything on our community.cireson.com. But you can actually get formal support if you'd like to via a support package. So you can actually purchase just a support package to assist you with that community edition as well. Now, a couple of times there I've mentioned things like remote management and the System Center Control Center. I do want to just take a moment just to show people this is something that we released, I believe it was late last year, early this year, is the new add-in into our fully featured Analyst Portal. And that is the ability to link a computer or a user to an incident or a ticket, and then by using the remote management tools, we can actually click on that particular user and trigger off these tools that will then pop out inside the browser that allows the analyst to not only just log the ticket, but also start to diagnose the issue with that computer, potentially even fix that issue, and then close it off all within the one screen without having to have the config manager tools open somewhere else, maybe a remote desktop, maybe a remote PowerShell session. No need for any of those to be open as well. We can see all of that in a single pane of glass, which I think is really, really powerful. Simple things like if you've ever done anything with Configuration Manager in the past, you'll know that the WMI from time to time might get out of whack or become corrupted, and you'd have to go in manually to that machine and rebuild that WMI or verify that WMI to see that it is actually working. So we can actually trigger those remotely to be able to get WMI up and working again. We can do things like update the policy, the machine policy, and so forth. Instead of having to go in manually to the machine, actually doing that and invoking that remotely, which is really, really powerful. All from within the same screen that we're logging the ticket. From a user's perspective, from an end user perspective, when we add an affected user to a ticket here as well, we can actually reset their password, detect whether or not their account is actually unlocked on the domain, and unlock it if we need to. So no more need for 80 users of computers, which is pretty cool as well. So a lot of that sort of stuff, extra tools that you would have in your environment on your screen at the time when you're going through calls. This allows you to get rid of a lot of those tools and actually lock it down, and even audit a lot of those features as well. So for example, resetting password isn't normally audited inside most organizations, whereas this allows you to audit that. But that's, so if you want to have a chat about any of these remote management features or any of the other sort of paid features that appear in the Analyst Portal, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to show you more of a demo on that if you'd like. But that's not what today's webinar is about. Today's webinar is about starting your sort of incident management and ticket management journey. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be quiet here and sort of hand over to Joy Van here to actually do a bit of a demo and get into these pieces. What I will do is just start here and sort of talk about ITIL and talk about some ITSM pieces first, just to sort of set the scene before we get into actually seeing the product running and so forth. You might, in previous systems, you may have called incident management a ticket, that everything was a ticket. If someone wanted a new computer, it was a ticket. If someone broke their computer, it was a ticket. If someone wanted to change something, it was a ticket. Instead, there's actually many types of tickets under ITIL, and System Center Service Manager calls it work items. So those work items really break down into being incident management, which is break fix, service request, which is request management, something that someone wants that is requesting from us. Change request, of course, change to a production system in some way. Problem records, which are root cause analysis, is the best way to be able to describe that. And then, of course, release request as well, which is the final one around releasing of projects and release of changes into production. So when we start talking about incident management, we're really talking about break fix. If we ever talk about work items, we're talking about the actual ticket that someone has logged or raised, for example. Okay, so when we talk, so actually, Jovan, do you want to take over at this point and start talking about how this process then sort of fits in with the service management lifecycle and everything from here?
Yep, certainly.
All right, cool. Well, I'll hand over to you, and I'll come back and finish things up at the end of the webinar. I will hand over control to you as well.
All right, sounds good.
I think it's that one. I think I click on there. Should have control now.
Let me see. All right, yep, there we go. And then let me share my screen and let me know if you are able to see that.
Looks okay to me.
All right, perfect.
Excellent.
All right, thank you, Brett. All right, so continuing on, what we'll be doing is taking the ITIL process and putting that into Service Manager, or rather, Service Manager itself already provides a framework to follow ITIL processes. And so any ITIL-driven process will look the same, whether it's in Service Manager or some other service management solution or incident management solution. You'll be following roughly some type of process like this one, where it starts with identification and logging, where first you get a ticket, an incident, and then you do something with it. And we'll be discussing this a little bit more in depth momentarily about how this relates very specifically to Service Manager and how you can essentially make this a lot easier and better with the freemium version of the portal. But in the meantime, let's take a closer look at how to set this up within Service Manager the correct way, and then go over a few pitfalls about what not to do, and then give you a few tips and tricks on how to make it work as efficiently as possible. So let's go right one. And there are a few different things that you can do to make sure that each step is actually followed correctly. This is a little bit variable for incidents, but the same process will be followed roughly for all incidents. This is a little bit different than other work item types, the service request or change request, in that incidents are usually break fixes. And so if something's broken, there's not necessarily a very specific workflow process to follow, but this is fairly close and it should handle most requests, most incidents. So we'll come back to this momentarily and discuss each one of these in depth. For now, let's just take a look at Service Manager and some processes that you might want to set up, some settings, how to build out Service Manager before we take a look at setting up an incident using an ITIL process or ITIL process. Right. So the first thing with Service Manager is installing it and then setting up the out-of-box settings correctly. After installing it, there's a few things that you might want to do, either getting rid of some out-of-box stuff or just setting up some brand new stuff correctly so that it's set up and essentially making it future-proof so that it's easier to maintain going forward and actually follows ITIL processes. Every now and then, I'll see an organization that has Service Manager installed, but they didn't quite know where to go from there, and so they just started doing their own thing. And sometimes it works for them, but sometimes eventually down the road it just doesn't. They'll need to redo some stuff, delete a bunch of values or move some data to somewhere else in order for it to actually have data be exportable or have it be upgradable or just be efficient. We'll take a look at that in a moment, but the first thing I want to talk about is cleaning up some of the out-of-box items that come within Service Manager. So if we take a quick look, now one of our other consultants wrote a blog around management packs. So we're just going to take a quick look at that. When you first install Service Manager, it does install a bunch of management packs. What we'll want to do is remove a few of those, or remove some of the data in a few of those so that it doesn't store it into system management packs. And this link will be provided later, but essentially it tells you all of the things that you can go through, essentially cleaning up some of the list items, some of the out-of-box request offerings that are in 20 different languages, some very specific things that you can do within the views, some template items. Some really, really good info is here. It should give you a really good idea of either how Service Manager works or how to clean up the items that you need to, both the unsealed MPs and some of the settings themselves. If we take a look at a management pack, let's go ahead and open up our list of management packs so we can show you exactly what they are. And we're just going to glance at them. And we'll do incident library. And we will grab this out-of-box one, which contains a bunch of Service Manager incident-related items. And we won't go through it too much, but we will just show you that it is just a bunch of XML. And anyone can go in and make some changes to this XML. In particular, you've got a bunch of list values that might just look like gibberish right now, but if you have too many of these, then all in the same MP, then it will get a lot harder to move them later on. And so you do want to remove them from the out-of-box MPs as soon as possible, and then put them in a custom unsealed MP so that you can use them going forward. All of this is detailed in Jeff's blog, so I highly recommend taking a look at it. Next, I want to go over naming some of the organization around your management packs. So one of the common pitfalls is to go into Service Manager and put everything into the exact same management pack, which seems easy at first. You might have your one single custom MP, and actually I think Service Manager provides one out of box for you. Maybe it was, I forget the exact name, but there's one for just all custom management pack data, maybe default management pack, where you can put all of your out-of-box stuff. That's a terrible idea. You don't want to do that. You want to essentially create an MP that is, one, recognizable, so that you and anyone else can go in and see it and think, oh, this type of data goes here. And two, you want to break them up, kind of modularize them, so that different data types go into different MPs. This is for a couple different reasons. One, if you have to modify an MP, it's a lot easier to modify it if it's smaller and only contains one type of data, for example, a specific list value, as compared to one MP that contains templates, request offerings, list values, SLAs, queues, and a bunch of other items. If you accidentally modify one item, it might modify or have an impact on another item. And this can get kind of dangerous if you're importing an MP. So you have to export an MP, make a change, a very specific change to it, and then import it. If you don't know what all that impacts, then it could make some rather terrifying changes if you don't know what to expect. So what I would probably suggest is coming up with a list. So I've got where did I put you? That's on another box. Well, I'll just show you the list of MPs that I've got. What I normally suggest is naming your MPs after your organization, and then naming it after the location within Service Manager that it's located in, followed by the role and what it actually does. So you'll see I've got a bunch of library lists. So if we look for, say, service request status, we can go to library, lists, and then find service request status. And that one management pack will only contain data for our service request statuses. So out of box, you will have some sealed values that you cannot modify. But then you might have some other additional values that you might need to add underneath in progress or something like that. See, incident might be a better one to look at here. So let's go with tier Q. Because this is a common one that everyone adds different values to. So normally out of box, if you just come in and you modify any of these, it will add them to the out of box incident management pack. You don't necessarily want to do that. A while ago, a few years ago, Microsoft had an issue where they would come in and create a UR of some sort, and then that UR would then update the out-of-box management packs. So when you patch Service Manager, and this was a while ago, they haven't done this in a while, but when you were patching Service Manager, it would then update or import new unsealed management packs, replacing and completely overwriting your changes. And so you'd have to do a lot of work to fix that. Whereas if you had custom management packs, that you would be completely unaffected. So that's another good reason to not store data in the out-of-box management packs, and to go through and clean them as soon as you install Service Manager, or maybe a little bit after the fact. But just keep that in mind. There are a couple of risks if you don't take care of that early on. Apart from those, there's a lot of things in administration that you can add management packs to as well. You've got SLOs, you've got some workflows, you've got your notification subscriptions and templates. Just making sure that you have a common naming scheme that is very recognizable is very beneficial and very, very much recommended. Next, how to get data into Service Manager. So Service Manager has a very very useful, very efficient CMDB, and it's got a lot of ways that you can get data in and therefore get data out. The problem is if you put too much data in or you put the wrong data in, then it'll be really hard to get data out. So setting up, say, connectors is the first step to getting data in, and you want to make sure that you set those up correctly. So one common mistake that a lot of organizations do is setting up the AD connectors either improperly or just not as efficiently as they can. They might come in and just create one AD connector that grabs everything. And that might work well for smaller organizations, but it's got a lot of overhead for larger organizations. And so you'll want to come in and create some smaller, more efficient AD filters or AD connectors, and then potentially not even use AD to bring in computer objects, use configman or some other type of much more efficient connector. The configman connector will only bring in machines with an active agent, which is almost definitely the correct filter and what you want to bring in. There might be some exceptions in AD. You might have some servers or some devices that don't have a client, in which case you could then create an AD connector specific to those machines, either a specific OU or some other type of filter. But essentially, know that you should be creating filters here. In particular, let's take a look at the AD enabled users one. You can throw in this LDAP filter and easily filter down all of your non-enabled users, all of your service accounts you don't care about, all the users that are completely unrelated to Service Manager. And you can get kind of tricky with these filters, and you can always test these in Active Directory as well. So you can just copy this, paste it into the query window within AD, and then it'll give you a complete list of all of the users or groups or whatever object that you're filtering on, just to make sure that it's got exactly what you're looking for.
And why, Joyvan, would it be better to filter out accounts that are disabled or set up different AD connectors like this to be able to filter out different ones?
We've got a couple different reasons. My personal favorite reason is speed. It's a lot easier and a lot faster and better to only search for, say, one of 10,000 users as compared to one of 20,000 users. But you might also run into licensing issues as well, since depending on the way that you have licensing set up, you might have to pay additional fees, additional licenses for users that are in your CMDB.
Good point.
So next, moving on to user roles. So there's a few ways to set up user roles depending on what you're trying to achieve. If we take a look at our security, user roles, we have a bunch of user roles out of box. And the normal inclination is to go in and say, I want to add all of my analysts to a specific role. Let's pick the either advanced operators or incident resolvers role and just come in here and add our AD group to this role. And that is not the preferred way to do it, since these users generally have access to too much stuff, and you can't actually control that access from these out-of-box user roles. So if I come into queues, yeah, they have access to all work items, but then they also have access to all config items, all catalog groups, and pretty much everything, actually. And sometimes that's okay, but usually that's not. And so it's definitely recommended to come in and then create your own custom user roles. And then you can base those off of any of these out-of-box roles. And so in this case, I created a brand new user role for all analysts. And in this case, I do want them to have access to all work items. If the form loads, there we go. So they have access to all work items, but then not access to config items. And we could set that up if we wanted to, but in this case, we don't want to. And so you could also set this up more granularly if you wanted to, only have them access to specific items, perhaps users or perhaps computers, but not any of your asset data if you wanted to go that route. Similarly, one pretty tricky role is granting read-only access. So you don't grant it on this specific role here for any item. You actually create a different user role. for read-only operator. And then once you have this role created, you can then grant it access to any of the items within the system. So even though it's a read-only role, I could come over to config items and give them access to all configuration items, or all queues if you wanted to give them read access to all of your work items. But then this would only give them read-only access. So kind of misleading there, because it makes the form look like it's granting full unrestricted access to whatever you specify, but it's only full unrestricted read-only access. So
they'll be able
to
see it but not edit it.
Yes, precisely.
Yeah. Cool.
Yep. Yeah, very, very useful, and definitely recommended for a lot of scenarios. So next, let's take a look at the same form that we were looking at before, the same model that we were looking at before, but let's take a look at some items a little bit more in depth and see how you can add those or manage those in our portal. So starting with identification and logging. So there's a few different ways that you can get a ticket into the system. A normal end user can submit it. A normal IT analyst can submit it. A manager can submit it. You can have an event that submits it, either a reoccurring scheduled event or an alert. Maybe you've got some operations manager events going on and you want those to create some incidents. You've got some orchestrator runbooks running and they're checking on any number of automated items and creating potential tickets. You have config man that's checking for specific issues. You might have a hard drive failure that's detected and it automatically submits a ticket. Any number of items can create tickets and we'll create those as incidents within Service Manager. Depending on exactly what you have going on, you might need to classify those a little bit differently, which we'll touch on in a sec. But a ticket, an incident can come from pretty much any source, from any method. So a user could call in, they could email in, they could use the portal. It could be an automated event from Opsman or orchestrator. It doesn't really matter. As long as it gets into the system, we can identify it and then set up a lot of either properties so that we can log them properly and then do some reporting on them, or just make them easier to manage if they've been classified properly. And then when you do initially create a ticket, there are a few items that you do need to capture. How did it happen? Who is it affecting? And then is anything else down? You essentially need to know the scope of the ticket. And then that'll help you either classify it correctly through the rest of this process or assign it correctly if it needs to be escalated or something like that. Right. And actually one item I do want to show is the source as well. So if we open up an incident, oops, let's go ahead and renew that. If we open up any incident, we have a number of fields that we can modify. One of them is source. And we can set this up in a number of ways, either manually or automated. And if we scroll down a little bit, so we have a source currently of portal, but we could modify this to be something else. And this is probably one of the most underused automated fields that I've seen. Normally you set it on a template and you kind of forget it, but this can be pretty useful for either trying to move users away from using specific types of submissions, for example, phone, or another very common one is in-person. You can grab all of those tickets that are either phone or in-person through some really easy reporting, which we have a couple canned out-of-box reports that you can look at, which I'll show in a little bit. And then classify those or see why they're submitting them as phone or in-person and try to push them towards using a portal and then only use certain sources for emergencies. It's a little bit underutilized from many of the organizations that I've worked with, but it might come in handy. Next, how do you classify an incident. So when it first comes in, you have to ask a question, is it really an incident? And if it is, then you have to classify it, or rather categorize it, and then finish off with the rest of the process. If it's not an incident, which is pretty common, you might get a user calling in and they might need something, they want something new, they have a request, they have a simple question, then that's not really an incident. You have to specify that as something else. That's usually a service request, and you can classify that accordingly. A lot of organizations don't necessarily do that, but they may want to, especially if that request has a workflow process behind it. Incidents themselves are break fixes, usually. And so you can't have a process that needs approval, needs some reviews, has one team touch it, and then has another team do something else to it. That's not really how incidents work. That's not how they're supposed to work. And so you would definitely want to reclassify that ticket as some other type. If this is a break fix item, an incident of some sort, then you have to categorize it and then see how exactly you want to deal with it. So the first way to classify it or categorize it is with the incident classification. So if we head back, we've got a classification dropdown. And this is a fairly important list if you want to do any type of reporting and get any type of real metric data out of it. The main thing here is to keep this list small. One very common thing that I see is organizations wanting to put as much detail, like make this as granular as possible. And every now and then I'll go into an organization that has like 100 or 200 different classifications, and they'll be nested 2 or 3 or even 4 levels deep. And in particular, they might have something like software problems, and then underneath software problems, they might have Adobe, and then they might have Microsoft, and then they'll list every single software that's available in the organization. And that makes me cringe every time I see it. The amount of admin overhead to make that happen is considerable, since every time you have a new piece of software, you have to then add it, you have to manage your software list in this list. That's much better suited to a CI. You can just relate a different CI, software CI, or a hardware CI, which would tell you if it's a server or a computer or a tablet or something like that. Or any other CI would be ideal for relating to the ticket and then keeping this classification list short. And then similarly, if you have a large list, your analysts will come in and they'll give up, essentially trying to find the exact specific item in this list. So if you have kind of ambiguous items, like you might have hardware, mobile devices, iPad, in that case, your analyst might come in, they might see mobile devices and just select that one instead of selecting iPad, and your reporting is then incomplete. So you want something that's kind of crystal clear, a really short, concise list with no possible way to mistake what should be selected, which is easy for most items. Sometimes it does get a little bit ambiguous, but it depends on each organization. The takeaway here is make this kind of a short list that anyone can see at a moment's glance.
Yeah, I think one of absolutely the important thing there is as you said, to keep that short. The reason people have such a long list there, and people listening to the webinar right now going, well, we've got a really long list, but we need it. And the reason we need it is for reporting. Reporting, you want to be able to pull out, the type of, yes, it's a hardware problem, but what type of hardware, what brand of hardware, what model of hardware. And that's where that related CI comes in, the configuration item, the computer, the device, actually related to the ticket as well. So the categorization being that hardware problem, I can then report on what type of computer was actually attached to it. Was it a mobile device? Was it an iPad? Was it a Apple? Was it a iOS? Was it Android? And then the fix category as well. At the end of it, I don't know if Joyvan's going to go into this one, we'll also then give you, was it a hardware fault? Was it a user fault? Was it a software fault? So from that, you actually get quite a lot of extra depth to that reporting without needing that huge long list. And I guess I'm interjecting here because it is one of the biggest, most fundamental things to get right, because your reporting will be a lot more accurate. You'll waste a lot less administration time, and your analysts will not be as frustrated when they're logging tickets.
Yes, that is exactly correct. And yep, this is look at the other resolution category list, and this is an out-of-box list, so I don't actually have those values in quite yet. I absolutely forgot to put those in. But yeah, you are absolutely right. This, in conjunction with the classification, can provide so much value for reporting, especially if there's small, concise lists that give you exactly what you want. And it's essentially free reporting, free data, because your analysts, they're kind of given, I don't want to say no choice but to pick the correct result, but they'll just be inclined to pick the correct result and give you proper reporting without having to like do some weird type of SQL query that kind of takes one value and says that it should be a different value, which I've done before. It's just really tedious, and it could be fixed by setting up the data correctly the first time.
And of course, there's one category you should never add.
Yes.
Which is?
Other.
Other, yes. Don't ever have an other, or analysts will give up, go, oh, I'm not sure, other. If you start to add 5 or 10% of the tickets go to there, or even more, I've seen anywhere up to 70% of tickets being categorized as other, your reporting goes out the window, because there's no, once you've lost that data, you don't know what that then associates with. So you definitely try and keep it as generic as possible. You'll get a lot more accurate reporting.
Yep, absolutely. All right. So the next item is the priority. So priority has a couple different uses. One is just letting your analysts know how important a ticket is, so whether they should be working on it or not. But two, it can also drive some of your SLAs. And that's very important, not only for reporting, but because you might have a contractual obligation to fulfill or to complete tickets, complete incidents within a certain amount of time. And a lot of organizations, they use this, but they don't necessarily use it as efficiently as they can, or they might not even be using SLAs in some cases. They just kind of have it as an analyst reminder and say, hey, this is a priority 1. It's kind of important. Maybe you can get to it. That's good, but I strongly suggest throwing in some SLAs, even if you don't have a contractual obligation, simply because it's best practice. And it not only lets your analysts know that the clock is ticking, it does give them a visual feedback of which tickets that they should be working on. So for example, if I open up a list of all work items, I can get a very easily viewable list of all of my SLAs or incidents that have SLAs. Some have been exceeded, but some still have some time remaining. I thought I had some with warnings as well. Maybe not. Nope. Maybe they expired. But yeah, you can have different SLAs depending on different tickets. And so in my case, if I open up my list of SLAs, and Service Manager makes SLAs and SLOs, service level agreements and service level objectives, ambiguous. So I'm also using them ambiguously, but objective is the desired amount of time that you can complete something in, which is usually shorter and less than the SLA, the agreement time that you've normally been contractually obligated to fulfill. In this case, I've got a few different ones for different priorities, and this is the most common SLA that you'll see and should probably stick to using. But you can also do other ones based on support group, and you can kind of mix and match. You can have different tickets, different either incidents or service requests have different SLAs, multiple SLAs if you choose, and they all appear within the portal, very easily seeable. So if we come back to this one, right now I only have one on this ticket, but if you have multiple, you can click on the drop down and it'll have all of them listed here, along with how much time is remaining. So pretty easy to see, and then deal with accordingly. So if I open up my list of settings, for incidents, you can specify what SLAs or what priority gets set on each incident based on the priority matrix. So if I take a look at the priority calculations that I've got here, currently I've got a 3x3 matrix. You can increase this and add more urgency or impact values if you so choose. But essentially, if you have an impact of 1 and an urgency of 1, it'll be extremely low priority. And you can increase this to 9 or something like that if you have multiple values. And then if you've got high, it'll make it 1. This kind of varies per organization. You could say the user gets to pick the urgency, the impact, that is, how many people does it affect, versus the urgency, how important it is. If you have a request offering, for example, and you put both of these on the request offering and you ask the user to fill out both of these, it might sound good on paper, but they always pick high for both because everything is super important to them. That could work for your organization, but it won't, so I probably wouldn't recommend it. If you just have one of these and say, how many users does this affect, or are you completely down, are you partially down, and just kind of get not necessarily a high or low or number out of them, but what it actually affects, then that could add to some of your automation without having your analysts select what this value should be, or without having a template select what this should be, which is very useful as well. So kind of keep that in mind when designing your matrix. You could add some automation to it, or you could just have it be manually selected, or you could just have it be a default value of 3 or 5 when you first create a ticket, and then have your analysts manually change it depending on some of the ticket criteria. But you do have a few options here. Okay. After you've classified it properly, then you can move on to investigating it and figuring out what you want to actually do with the ticket. So this part doesn't really have a specific order, or a specific method of completing it, because every incident is going to be completely different. It could be software, could be hardware, could be user related. It could be some really weird issue going on. One of my most favorite issues that I had a long time ago in a past life was a scanner, a wired scanner that wasn't working for a user. And skipping several hours of troubleshooting, it turned out that it was in a specific corner of the building on the 3rd floor that had an EMF, electromagnetic field, going on in that office to prevent interference. And that was causing the scanner to not work until you physically move the scanner 20 feet to the left, and then it just starts working. Yeah, just random stuff, but everything can be classified as pretty much anything in this step. It just takes proper investigation to figure out what's going on with it. And sometimes you can't figure out something, and so you have to escalate it. And there's a couple ways to escalate it. Actually, before we go into escalation, let's talk about grabbing tickets initially as well. So after a ticket is classified, you might have an analyst that doesn't know if they should take it or not. So in my case, if I head, just going to cancel it there. If I head to, say, either all incidents or, in this case, let's go with teamwork. So say I'm on a team, I'm on the help desk team, for example. Help desk team, service desk team, either or. And I don't know which tickets I should take. If I look at my list, I've got a few items, a few tickets that I can take that don't currently have an assigned to user. And so then what should happen normally in an ideal environment is I, as the analyst, come in, I know I should be doing some work. I see I've got some open tickets. I should pick the one that's most suited to my skills, maybe one that's kind of challenging, or maybe just some low-hanging fruit, doesn't really matter. And then just pick it and assign it to myself and start completing it. What often happens is your analysts will use this as a secondary source. They'll come into the portal and complete their tickets or modify it, add some work, some action log entries or something. But then they'll wait on their email to get new tickets. If it works for them, that's fine too. But email is kind of a little outdated, not necessarily last era per se. I mean, it is a little bit, but not quite the item I'm trying to say. It's more the service portal is always up to date. And so if someone else assigns a ticket to themselves and you get an email about it, you don't know that that ticket's already taken. And so you might then open that up in the portal, start working on it, and realize, oh, someone else already took this ticket, and you just wasted 5 minutes. That's a very, very common issue. Probably one of the most common issues with using email as the main source is knowing when it's assigned to someone and then not doing any work on the ticket when you shouldn't be. Whereas when you have the portal, you can just come in and easily see if it's already assigned to someone and then just ignore that ticket. So after I find a ticket and I assign it to myself, great. I can then go in and start doing the investigation and then seeing if I can resolve it in some form or fashion. What happens if I don't know who to assign it to, or I don't know if I can do it, but I know I should probably assign it to someone else besides myself. Maybe someone else on my team isn't doing it, or maybe I'm the help desk manager. I know that no one on my team can do it. I need to give it to someone else. Oftentimes, there's going to be someone who knows who you can assign it to. This list isn't really written down anywhere. So say you go in, you know you need to assign it to someone, but then if we click on the support group, once it loads, it is taking its time today. We'll just, okay, there we go. If you click on the support group, it might be apparent which support group you should assign it to, which normally in the backend will either have some workflow processes that will do something like kick off an email and assign it to that support group, especially if you're using something like our Notify Analyst app, or you could just have it go in their queue, and then they will hopefully, ideally, proactively be searching or looking at their queue and realizing, hey, we have a new ticket that was just assigned to us from someone else. We should probably start working on that. Sometimes you are able to assign the support group, sometimes you're not. One common scenario where you might not know exactly who to assign it to is, I'm going to pick on universities. Sometimes they have a centralized IT, and so you might have your smaller IT units, IT departments working on tickets, and they need to escalate something to the centralized IT, an exchange issue or network issue, and they don't know exactly who to send it to. In that case, what often works best is to either have a contact or several contacts within main IT, or ideally one single support group for main IT that could then potentially branch off into sub-support groups if you decided to go that route. And there's a few ways around that. That's one common solution. That doesn't work for all organizations, but you at some point want one point of contact or one list or several points of contact support group that has multiple people on it that then know how to properly route a ticket. This list, I've only seen it written down in a couple organizations. The problem is it changes fairly frequently. And so if you write it down, it's already outdated. Whereas if you don't write it down, it's going to eventually end up routed to the correct person. It's just a matter of how much effort it takes to get there. But let's say that you do need to route it to someone. Say you're at the service desk, you're at the, say, tier 1, and you need to route it to tier 2. There's a couple ways that you can do that. You can either come in and just select the correct support group and save it. And that will either kick off some workflows or just put it in their queue, which is pretty ideal. Or you could go in and check the escalated checkbox, which by itself doesn't actually do anything per se, but you could very easily toss in a workflow, an out-of-box workflow that triggers on this escalated checkbox and then lets someone else know. For example, the assigned to users manager or the primary owner or something else related to this IR. And you can also use it for reporting. For example, the end user asked for it to be escalated. You need to know how many incidents were escalated in the last X days or X months. And then you can find out why, and then hopefully decrease that amount and hopefully have some faster incident resolutions. The most common one is simply changing the support group, but we do every now and then see a few clients use escalated as well. So once you actually have a ticket and it is properly assigned to you and you know that it's something that you can tackle, then it's your job to then tackle it. Do some investigations, play with it, see if you can find out what the resolution is. And then once you resolve it, great. You go into the resolution and recovery stage. Otherwise, either no, you can re-escalate it, or essentially, if it's not going to be escalated to anyone else, you essentially escalate it to yourself again, or maybe another team member, or maybe you just work on it together, and then re-investigate, re-diagnose. Right? And that kind of repeats indefinitely. Sometimes there's going to be a little bit of a pause in here because with incidents, sometimes you can't just always be working on one single incident, especially if it's hardware related or it's waiting on someone else. And so what you could do is take a look at some statuses. Yeah, we'll take a look at those and change the status accordingly. So I think I've got some listed here. Yeah. Sometimes an incident won't always be active. You might want to set it to pending, which is still technically active because it's a child of active. But you can add some additional statuses to let everyone know, let the end user know exactly what's going on with the ticket. It's waiting on some hardware. It's waiting on your ISP to get back with you from some weird ISP network issue. It's waiting on the end user themselves to provide you with some information. And that way it would then remove itself from your list, depending on the view or query or search that you have set up. And just provides for just all around a better, either better metrics or better experience for most users involved. And then normally this is set up manually, so the analyst will come in and change the status, but you could set up some automation around it as well. For example, when the end user emails you back and emails the ticket, it adds it to the action log of the ticket, and then also updates the status on the ticket, either back to active or back to active waiting on analyst or something like that. So just some extra status stuff that you can do while investigating to make it easier on your workflow process. Once it is successfully resolved, then, oops, I kind of talked about that. Yep, once it's successfully resolved, then we mark it as resolved and do a few different items, mostly for reporting, or I guess half for reporting, and then half for incident management or ticket management to make sure that it's logged properly, and then potentially do some stuff like log the resolution or log the how it resolved, so that if it happens again, you know exactly how to fix it. Actually, one item I kind of skipped over for the escalation is what happens if you realize that it's a bigger issue, not just one incident. So there's a couple ways that you can handle that. I'm just going to go back one step. So say this one incident can't access shared folder. It turns out that the server for this shared folder is actually down. And so you get a bunch of different similar tickets. What you could do is either link to a parent's incident. So you have one incident that kind of contains a bunch of child incidents. What I would normally suggest for this is using a problem, a different work item type for this. Instead of an incident, you would create a problem and then link all the child incidents to a problem, which is a much better, more ITIL-centric way of dealing with these child parents incidents. But this version of the portal does allow you to link to parent incidents, and then once you resolve the parent's incident, it would then automatically resolve the children incidents, which is very, very useful and comes in handy if you don't want to open up 10 or 20 different smaller incidents and manually say, fixed it because the server was resolved, or server was fixed, the server issue was fixed. So keep that in mind as well. You do have that ability when escalating or dealing with incident resolution. Right. So once you do actually resolve the ticket, there's a few ways to properly set it as resolved. Normally, if you come in and just change the status here to resolved, you can have some workflow processes kick off. In particular, notifications are probably the most common thing that happen. So whatever you type in the resolution description, you can then have that send an email to the end user saying that it's been resolved. But more importantly, I mean, that part is kind of important, but for me, the more important part is the actual reporting. So setting the proper status, but then also setting the resolution category, because it essentially gives you free metrics. You can come back a month later, a year later, and say this was fixed by analyst or fixed by end user, fixed by, or auto resolved by, I don't want to say problem, by user because the user fixed it themselves, or any type of data that you're looking to grab can just be automatically entered and automatically logged with minimal efforts. Similarly, if you want to also log time, if we take a look at the resolution tab, so this one is also kind of underutilized for a large number of organizations, the amount of time that's been worked on a ticket. What I normally suggest is we've got some JavaScript that you can use, essentially some stuff that you can copy and paste with no real effort that will automatically log some amount of time for the analyst that's been working on this ticket. And the analyst doesn't even have to do anything. You could have them manually come in and log their time, or you could just have it automatically add a certain amount of time, say 15 minutes is the most common minimum amount of time, so that at the end of the year you could come in and say, these amount of tickets took this amount of time, roughly, and then come up with some metrics, some numbers on those. The most common metric is not necessarily you've only been working on tickets for 20% of your time that you've been working during the day, because that doesn't really work in this scenario, or at least not very well, or rather in pretty much every scenario that doesn't work well, since it forces analysts to either not use correct numbers or simply not use any numbers at all, and gives you bad metrics that way. Rather, it gives you much better numbers, much better amount of time worked based on the amount of tickets that you do in a given interval, so within a month or within a year. And you can then compare that to other time frames and say, we need more analysts or we need less analysts, or we need to kind of divvy up the work accordingly for these amounts of tickets. And then you can essentially assign a dollar figure for the amount of tickets based on the amount of time worked, and then see if that can justify, say, adding a new analyst into your fleet, which works fairly well if you have it set up. It does take a little bit of time to get the numbers set up correctly, but it works very well once it is actually operational. And it's all stuff that you can do just completely automated with no effort whatsoever. So it's more just free numbers, free data. So if it works, great. If it doesn't, that's great too. So next is closing the tickets. So after the tickets are resolved, they do still have a chance to be reactivated. So say you close a ticket or you resolve a ticket and the user calls back or emails back and say, nope, it's not resolved. Then you can reopen the ticket and fix it, or at least attempt to refix it and go through the resolution steps again. Once it is actually resolved and then for a certain amount of time closed after that, then the ticket cannot be opened. And if the user calls back and they want to reopen it, then you have to, or you should, by best practice, tell them to reopen a new ticket or just open a new ticket for them. Cireson helps out a little bit with that. If we take a look at our settings, we've got an app, a free community app called AutoClose, which will take any of your work items, and given a certain number of days, I have 14 in my settings, it will automatically close them if they are resolved and have not been modified in the last 14 days. And then after a certain amount of time, after the ticket's been resolved and then closed, and then not touched as closed for a certain amount of time, depending on data retention settings, it will then be removed from Service Manager. And if we take a look at our data retention settings, in my case, I have this set to 365 days. Out of box, this is set to something else, like 65 days or something lower. The rest of these are all at 365. So this is another out-of-box setting that you probably want to change. After 1 year, then the items that are closed will be removed from Service Manager. They'll still persist in Data Warehouse, but they're removed from Service Manager. And the reason that you want to do that is entirely for speed. So if you have a large volume of tickets, you will probably notice a slowdown if you have this set to some extremely high number. Whereas if you have a small number of tickets, then you could probably bump this up a little bit and keep longer than 1 year's worth of data. But just keep in mind that if you do have a data warehouse environment, that's probably the best place for all of your long-term data, and you can keep any number of years there without any impact on performance on the main Service Manager environment. Yeah, and then after all of your tickets are closed, then you can't really touch them. There are some things, every now and then I get asked, can you really not touch them? Is there anything that we can do? We really need to reactivate it. The answer is yes, programmatically. So if you really, really need to, it's possible, but by best practice standard, no, you don't want to do that. All right. Oops, already did that. All right. And
that's pretty much it, man. Yeah, we've already done the demo as we sort of stepped through that whole thing. So thank you for everyone, and thank you, Joyvan, for that. I think that was really, really in depth. I apologize to everyone that we have run over, but I didn't want to interject on Joyvan because the content is so important, I think. So thank you for sticking by with us, and thank you to Joyvan for such in-depth look at incident management. Some real key pitfalls there that you can really fall into to cause yourself a lot of drama later on down the track. So by avoiding those pitfalls, it can save you a lot of time and give you a lot more accuracy in your data as well. So that's excellent. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up really quickly then. So the next steps from here, thank you very much again for your time today to join us here on this webinar. Just a reminder that we are actually recording this and it'll be up on our YouTube channel probably in the next couple of days. So the next steps from here is if you don't have a community app, a portal community app, please feel free to download it from that link there. You can always go to our community, community.cireson.com, and chat with other customers and also Cireson team members there. If you are looking for a paid support package, please feel free to email us there at team@cireson.com. And we've also got some other sessions coming up, part 2 of this webinar series, the efficient handling of service requests. So we're going to go through the same sort of ideas, but for service requests. And then part 3, we're going to have a look at change management as well. So change management is something that we can really get some more control around as well and bring into our service management tools as well. Next slide there, Joyvan, you've got control of it. Yeah, so that's it. If anyone does have any questions, I haven't seen any come through for the whole session. So either we're explaining things really, really well, or we're so boring that everyone's gone to sleep. But if you do have any questions, feel free to type them in now. If you don't have any questions, thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to chatting with you next time. Thanks, Joyvan.
My pleasure, and thank you, Brett. Thank you, everyone, for attending.
Thanks.